going to worship. Like a tidal wave crashing over me, rushing in to meet me here. Your love is fierce, like a hurricane that I can't escape, tearing through the atmosphere. Your love is fierce. To me from where the thunder hides. I can't outrun this heart I'm tethered to. With every step I can fly with you. Like a tidal wave, like a tidal wave crashing over me, rushing in to meet me here. Your love is fierce, like a hurricane that I can't escape, tearing through the atmosphere. Your love is fierce. You cannot fail. The only thing I found is through it all, you never let me down. At every turn, I come face to face with you. Like a tidal wave crashing over me, rushing in to meet me here. Your love is fierce, like a hurricane that I can't escape, tearing through the atmosphere. Your love is fierce. Chase me down, seek me out. How can I be lost when you have called me found? Chase me down, seek me out. How can I be lost when you have called me found? Chase me down, seek me out. How can I be lost when you have called me found? Like a tidal wave crashing over me, rushing in to meet me here. Your love is fierce, like a hurricane that I can't escape, tearing through the atmosphere. Your love is fierce, like a tidal wave crashing over me, rushing in to meet me here. Your love is fierce, like a hurricane that I can't escape, tearing through the atmosphere. Your love is fierce. Your love is fierce. Your love is fierce. Your love is fierce.
To see you here today. A couple of quick announcements for you. If you have been praying over this past week about the possibility of sponsoring a child through Compassion, we want to let you know that the table is still out in the Grand Concourse. Janet would love to talk to you if you've had it put on your heart to sponsor a child. Also, you might have noticed there are a lot of bags out in the grand concourse, those are laundry. And blankets and things like that from Royal Family Kids Camp. We want to give you an opportunity to serve here in many ways, and one of those ways is doing laundry. So if you'd like to grab a bag or two and take those home and launder them and bring them back next week, we want to encourage you to do that as a way of investing in Royal Family Kids Camp. Before we continue on in our worship today, reach out and say hi to somebody.
Good morning, East Richland family. I'm Sean. Welcome to this week's edition of The Update. First-time guests, we're glad you've joined us. Will you take a minute right now and fill out the yellow card in the pew rack in front of you? Then after the service, bring it to the Welcome Center in the foyer. We have a gift for you and some information about our church. Men, come out for a new summer study, Watch Your Mouth by Tony Evans, led by myself, Sean Frazier. Dates and times are in your bulletin. We invite you to join us on Sunday, July 9th at 6:30 p.m. for a time of worship and prayer for the persecuted church. Any questions, contact Bev Morgan or Ray Degg. Ladies, join us for our summer picnic at 11 a.m. at the church picnic shelter. Penny Pettit will be sharing. No childcare will be provided. Sign up today in the pew pad insert. As always, there'll be more details about all of these events and more in the bulletin. Make sure to get one. And don't forget to sign your name in the pew pad. We'd like to know you were here. And if you need anything, please find an usher and they'll be glad to assist you. And that's all for now. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of The Update.
God is fighting for us. God is on our side. We will not be shaken. We will not be moved. Jesus, you are here. I will live. I will not die. The resurrection power of Christ alive in me, and I am free in Jesus' name. I will live. I will not die. I will declare and lift you high. Christ revealed, and I am healed in Jesus' name. Here we go. God is fighting for us, pushing back the darkness, rising up the kingdom that cannot be shaken. In the name of Jesus, enemies defeated, and we will shout it out, shout it out. God is fighting for us, pushing back the darkness, lighting up the kingdom that cannot be shaken. In the name of Jesus, enemies defeated, and we will shout it out, shout it out. I will live, I will not die. The resurrection power of Christ alive in me, and I am free in Jesus' name. I will live, I will not die. I will declare and lift you high. Christ revealed, and I am healed in Jesus' name. I will live, I will live, I will not die. The resurrection power of Christ alive in me, and I am free in Jesus' name. I will live, I will not die. I will declare and lift you high. Christ revealed, and I am healed in Jesus' name. In Jesus' name. In Jesus' name. In Jesus' name. We worship you, Lord. He's coming on the clouds. Kingdoms will bow down. Every chain will break as broken hearts declare His praise. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah is roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow for the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before Him. So open up the gates way before the King of Kings. The God who comes to save God is lion, the lion Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the lion and the lamb. Every knee will bow before him. God, we thank you so much for the way your blood breaks the chains, how your cross sets us free. We worship you. Man of sorrows, Lamb of God, by his own betrayed, the sin of man and the wrath of God has been on Jesus' name. Silent as he stood accused, beaten, mocked, and scorned, bowing to the Father's will, he took a crown of thorns. Oh, that rugged cross, my salvation, where your love poured out over me. Now my soul cries out, hallelujah, praise and honor unto thee. Sin of heaven, God's own Son, to purchase and redeem and reconcile the very ones who nailed him to that tree. That rugged cross. Oh, that rugged cross, my salvation, where your love poured out over me. Now my soul cries out, hallelujah, praise and honor unto thee. Now my debt is paid, it is paid in full by the precious blood that my Jesus spilled. Now the curse of sin has no hold on me. Whom the Son sets free, is free indeed. Now my debt is paid, it is paid in full by the precious blood that my Jesus spilled. Now the curse of sin has no hold on me. Whom the Son sets free, is free indeed. Oh, that rugged cross, my salvation, where your love poured out over me. Now my soul cries out, hallelujah, praise and honor unto thee. See, the stone is rolled away. Behold the empty tomb. Hallelujah, God be praised. He's risen from the grave. Oh, that rugged cross. Now my soul is in honor unto thee. Oh, that rugged real love poured out on me. Now my soul cries out, hallelujah, praise and honor to me.
We're going to open the altar. If you'd like to come forward, feel free.
You were the Word at the beginning, one with God, the Lord Most High. Your hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you, our Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. Didn't want heaven without us, so Jesus, you brought heaven down. My sin was great, your love was greater. What could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus.
Death could not hold you.
Death could not hold you. The veil torn before you. You silenced the boast of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, praise of your glory. For you are raised to life again. You have no rival. You have no equal, now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory, yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is, what a powerful name it is, the name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus.
No rival.
You have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory.
Amen. Well, you may be seated. We are so glad to see you here today. I want to give you just a quick update on Pastor Jerry. He called me yesterday evening, and he said, Dave, we're stuck in Toronto. So they've made it back to the continent from England, and so hopefully they're back. They were supposed to fly into Cleveland last evening. He wasn't sure of the status of their flight at that point, so he was hoping that somebody wouldn't come by and say, hey, we're going to offer you a hotel room tonight. So hopefully they got back to Cleveland last night, and he'll be back with us next week. Well, we want to continue on in our time of worship, and this is such an important time because it gives you an opportunity to be stirred by God, to give a portion of what God has given you sacrificially, that we could have a facility like this, to be able to have a nursery like you saw the video that ministers to so many children. And so we want to give you an opportunity now to give a portion of what God has given to you as I invite the ushers to come and take up our morning tithes and offerings.
Earth has quaked before, moved by the sound of his voice. Seas that are shaken and stirred can be calmed and broken for my regard. And through it all, my eyes are on you. Through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes on you. It is well with me. Far be it from me to not believe, even when my eyes can't see. This mountain that's in front of me will be thrown into the midst of the sea. And through it all, my eyes on you. Through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes on you. It is well. It is well. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves of wind still know His name. Let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and wind still know His name. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and wind still know His name. The waves and wind still know His name. It is well with my soul. through it all is through it all, my eyes it is well with me.
Well, I'm going to invite you to stand for the reading of God's Word, and we're going to have Bill Mell. Bill is our men's ministry director, and we want to get a face in front of you for men. If you have any interest in plugging into the men's ministry, this is the guy that you want to see. Bill, come and read God's Word for us this morning.
2 Samuel, verse 24, starting in verse 21. Then Araunah said, "Why has my lord the king come to his servant?" And David said, "To buy the threshing floor from you in order to build an altar to the Lord, that the plague may be held back from the people." And Araunah said to David, "Let my lord the king take and offer up what is good in his sight. Look, the oxen for the burnt offering, the threshing sledges, and the yokes of the oxen for the wood. Everything, O king, Araunah gives to the king." And Araunah said to the king, "May the Lord your God accept you." However, the king said to Araunah, "No, but I will surely buy it from you for a price, for I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God, which cost me nothing." So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver.
You may be seated. Thanks, Bill. So, am I on? There we go. So I am at times discombobulated, but this is the first time I've ever been able to actually discombobulate a whole service. So I'm actually proud of myself this morning. I know that means nothing to you, but it's pretty good for me. I will say this week we do celebrate being in the land of the free. And there's something about Americans that love free stuff as well. All right, so I know here just a couple weeks ago, there was a brand new IKEA that went in Columbus. And so people lined up for I don't know how long, but what I do know is this, is that the first 44 people got free couches. All right, that's pretty good. I know I'm a pretty big supporter. Lots of my dollars have gone to the offering plate at Chick-fil-A. And so I've had a lot of Chick-fil-A sandwiches. And what I know about Chick-fil-A is this, is that they, when they open up a new store, they'll give away free chicken for a year to the first 50, first 100 people that's in line. Because, let's face it, we like free stuff. Again, I've gone by those stores when they were first opening, and you just see people lined up for certainly well before it ever opened, maybe a day or even two before. But I'll say this, what I have come to also notice is this, is a lot of times, I mean, I'm not going to say this ever happened in our student ministry, but a lot of times, if I don't charge something, people don't show up, all right? So, supposed to come, but, you know, I really didn't cost me if I don't, so they don't. Well, I know this. People tend to show up, though, when it costs them something, when they're putting something in it. Now, this probably will not be a shock to you, but I was sometimes the distraction in my high school classes. Middle school, elementary, honestly, I was a pretty big distraction quite a bit. And if I wasn't the distraction, to be quite honest with you, I was happy for whoever was a distraction that day so that we could get off of whatever the teacher was really, truly wanting to talk about. But college was a whole different situation for me. All of a sudden, I had this purpose. I knew what I wanted to be. I knew what it was that I was there for. I knew what I wanted to get out of this. And I was paying for it myself. All right? And so all of a sudden, when students started to play some of those games in the class, I'm like, oh my goodness, what is going on here? All of a sudden, when somebody asks a dumb question, and yes, in college, I know whatever they say to you now, there are dumb questions, all right? So whatever that may be, I'm sitting there and I'm going, are you kidding me? I felt like they were wasting, what, my time, my education, my money? Here's what I've learned so many times is this, is it is better to have some skin in the game, all right? And I think maybe that's why the story in 2 Samuel 24 kind of resonates with me. I know this about the story. We didn't read this part of it, but honestly, this all gets put into motion because David has sinned. He sinned because he counted the people, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but in Exodus 30, verse 12, it says this, when you take a census of the Israelites to count them, each one must pay the Lord a ransom for his life at that time he is counted. Then no plague will come on them when you number them. You see, in those times, a man only had the right to count, to number whatever belonged to him. And Israel didn't belong to David. Israel belonged to God. It was up to God to command a census, and if David counted, he should only do it at God's command, receiving this ransom to atone for the counting. Look, people knew this wasn't the right thing to do. Joab, even his commanding officer, even if you look in the passage, says, look, this isn't what we should do. But, hey, it's good to be king. And so everybody always follows what you say, not what somebody else does. And so as the numbers are reported to David, again in the scripture, it would tell us that he becomes conscience-stricken. Now, I'll say this. Whether you feel sorry about whatever you just did or not, there's still going to be what? Consequences for that sin. But this is a rather unique situation because God allows David to choose what the consequence will be. Look what it says in 2 Samuel 24:13, and we see the prophet Gad coming to David, and it says this, so Gad went to David and said to him, shall there come on you 3 years of famine in your land, or 3 months of fleeing from your enemies while you pursue you, or 3 days of plague in your land? Now then, think it over and decide how I should answer the one who sent me. So the prophet Gad here is relaying God's message to David, and he's given 3 different scenarios. Do you want to have 3 years of famine? Do you want to have 3 months of people pursuing you, or do you want 3 days of a plague? And so David chooses in verse 14, and this is what David said to Gad, I am in deep distress. Let us fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great, but do not let me fall into human hands. And so here, David has sinned, and his entire kingdom pays for it as he chooses 3 days of plague. Now, his people really do pay for it because 70,000 people die from this plague. And at the very place where the plague ends, David is commanded and does so. He goes to make an offering to the Lord. And Aronach, the owner of the property, is more than willing to give the threshing floor to David for free. But notice what David does. He won't accept it for free and insists on paying for it. And these are the key words. He says, I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offering that cost me nothing. Now, David is king. He really just could have taken the property if he really wanted to. The property's even being offered to him for free by the owner, but instead he insists on paying for it. It says here that he paid 50 shekels of silver for the oxen and for the floor. In 1 Chronicles, you'll see that he paid 600 shekels of gold for the entire site, meaning here that he has paid 50 shekels of silver. He's paying 50 shekels of gold times 12 tribes of Israel for a total of 600 shekels. Well, he pays close to $300,000 to be able to offer this sacrifice to the Lord. A little side note is just the fact that this is actually going to be where the temple will end up being built. But why did David insist? Why did he say, I have to pay for this myself? I think it's because this. worship is personal. And as such, it can't be paid for someone by someone else. But it has to be paid by the person who is worshiping, who is following his God. And so don't miss this. As we worship, as we follow our Lord Jesus Christ, it's going to cost us something. I know this. Salvation is what? Salvation certainly is free. It's already been paid for, and that's a really good thing because, let's face it, we can't afford it. The only thing that can pay for that sin is the perfect sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And neither you, nor I, nor anyone else can pay for it on their own. But we can accept God's free gift of salvation. Now, there's a lot of people, I'm sure, that are in here that could quote Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Maybe fewer of us, though, could go on and keep quoting the verses that come afterwards. So let's look at these verses. It says this in verse 24, and all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood, to be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate his righteousness because in his forbearance he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. Our sins demanded a payment that we could never afford, something that we could never earn, but Jesus truly makes that payment for us at great cost. The shedding of his own blood, dying on the cross, making it a just payment. And this payment is freely applied to all who receive it through faith, through trust in Jesus alone. But don't miss this. Following Jesus isn't cheap. Okay? Following Jesus isn't cheap. But there is a cost. It cost God everything. Jesus was brutally beaten. He dies on the cross. The cost is huge to God, but there is a cost for you and I as well. For while grace is free, following Jesus will be costly. Jesus knows this. As a matter of fact, before you even enter into a relationship with him, here's what he says to us. In Luke 14:28, he says this, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. In talking about this passage, John Stott says this. He says, the Christian landscape is strewn with the wreckage of derelict, half-built towers, the ruins of those who began to build and were unable to finish. For thousands of people still ignore Christ's warning and undertake to follow him without first pausing to reflect on the cost of doing so. The result is the great scandal of Christendom today, so-called nominal Christianity. In countries to which Christian civilization has spread, large numbers of people have covered themselves with a decent but thin veneer of Christianity. They have allowed themselves to become somewhat involved, enough to be respectable, but not enough to be uncomfortable. Their religion is a great soft cushion. It protects them from the hard unpleasantness of life while changing its place and shape to suit their conveniences. No wonder the cynics speak of hypocrites in the church and dismiss religion as escapism. Now, maybe you think John Stott's his assessment as being somewhat being harsh, and the fact that he believes that so many people aren't counting the cost before choosing Christ. But I'll say this to you. Jesus was pretty concerned about it himself, because he not only offers one illustration about counting the cost, he goes on and gives another one. And so he goes on in verse 31 to say this, or suppose a king is about to go to war against another. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. My guess is that you, like me, we do not want to be labeled as one of what John Stott says, a nominal Christian, with just enough Christianity to make ourselves feel better, but not enough to really change who we are, let alone make a difference in the lives that are close to us, and certainly not have an impact on the lives that are around us that are hurting. But how easy is it for us to just live life comfortably, shrinking back when the cost of following Christ arises? It's much easier to avoid the difficult conversations with people, not taking a stand on important issues of our faith in the marketplace, or losing money sometimes on a deal because, well, we just cannot go back on what our word is. Jesus tells us to count the costs. So I thought this morning we would just spend a little bit of time in talking about what some of those costs are. And so let me start with number one. Count the costs. The cost that comes in our relationships. In our relationships. In Luke 14:26, it says this: if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Yikes. Did he just say hate? Does that not just strike you as just a little crazy at first glance? If anyone would come to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, Jesus is making a pretty big point here, isn't he? That in comparison to anybody else on this planet, he is to have first place. And second place is where? Far in the distance. The late theologian philosopher Francis Schaeffer, whose life and books have impacted thousands for Christ, was raised in a non-Christian home. And after he became a Christian, his father didn't want him to go to college and certainly did not want him going to become a minister, which Fran had felt like he was called to do. When the moment finally came when he had to make the decision to go with what he thought God wanted or to submit to his father's wishes, Fran asked in a strained voice, "Pop, give me a few minutes to go down in the cellar and pray." And in fear and uncertainty, he went down there and wept hot tears of sorrow for his father. And then, in an act of desperate and simple faith, he did something that he would never advise anyone else to do. I should have put up on the screens, nobody else should do this, all right? But he says this, what he felt was right at the time, and he prayed this: "Oh God, please show me." Then he took out a coin and said, "Heads, I'll go in spite of my dad's desires." It was heads. Still weeping, he cried out, "God, be patient with me. If it's tails this time, I'll go." Tails. Third time he pleaded, "Once more, God, I don't want to make a mistake with Dad upstairs. Please now let it be heads again." It was heads. And so he went upstairs and told his dad that he had to go. His dad looked hard at him, then went out to slam the door. But just before the door hit the frame, his voice came through, "I'll pay for the first half year." It was many years later that Fran's dad became a Christian. But Francis thinks that this was the moment, that this was the basis of his dad's salvation, when Fran, in effect, declared, "I must follow the Lord." You know, again, this is a very tough verse. Following Christ means you will value Jesus above all others. And that means everyone. And that is easy to say, but it is extremely hard to fully implement, isn't it? It means not being involved in certain conversations at work, even though those are the very people that help you to determine what your future will be. It means continuing to share how God is making a difference in your life, even with a family member that doesn't want to hear it for the millionth time. It means ending a business partnership because they want to do things that are unethical. It means dating someone that's following Christ too, so that you don't end up in a marriage that's really hard to put Christ first. It means elevating Jesus in your family beyond when we can make it kind of commitment. It becomes really a daily practice of worshiping Jesus. And so relationships. The second cost is financial. Financial. Let me go back to our passage in 1 Samuel 24. Verse 24 says, "No, I insist on paying for it. I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing." Anyone in here ever have financial problems? Anybody in here have problems because they don't have much finances? Finances can be a huge stumbling block in the lives of believers in our day and age. Okay, well, based on how much Jesus talked about it in the Bible, maybe it's the fact that, honestly, people have been having problems with putting their finances in the right place for forever. And over all these years of ministry, I've certainly seen a lot of people get caught up in the pursuit of the almighty dollar. I think that's really why Jesus says this in Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. There is definitely a destructive nature to an unwillingness to not pay this cost. To seek after cash, then Jesus leads us down all kinds of dead-end roads. Like the person who spends all their time at work and then even at home thinking about work, trying to figure out how to get more, to make more. All of a sudden, God, gets pushed out because there's no time for him. But families suffer because, there's no leadership, there's no communication, there's no real community. The person even suffers. Why doesn't everyone understand that what I'm doing is for them? Or honestly, so many times it's really so that they can make themselves feel better about themselves. Or maybe it's like that couple that outspends what they make each week, each month, and they're just trying to buy nice things because, they work, so they deserve it, right? To keep up with their friends, or sometimes the pressures that families put on us, and so the couple argues a lot about money, and those unexpected expenses catch them off guard because they don't have anything in savings, and the pressure becomes even greater. And since they argue all the time about money, they're afraid to talk, and so honestly, they really are just choosing not to talk about anything anymore. And I'll just be honest, the scenarios are just endless because it's a huge problem for tons of Americans, and that includes a ton of Christ followers too. Not putting Christ first and allowing money to compete is a problem. But what about tithing? Does that come easy to you? Do you give cheerfully? I can remember my dad, going back to flipping that quarter, I can remember my dad giving me a quarter each Sunday to put in the offering plate when I was little. We were new Christ followers back in those days, and I certainly didn't have any idea what it meant to really give an offering, and I don't think my parents really knew much about it either. But I've come to certainly understand a whole lot more since those days, and I just know this, is that I can never remember a time when I regretted or felt something negative about putting my check in the offering plate. I know it all belongs to him. I'm really only putting in a portion. Since I mentioned my dad and we're talking about a cost financially, I know this. My dad drove a truck for a living for as long as I can remember. And when we moved to Indiana from Iowa, my dad started driving a team. And Theoretically, what that meant is this truck was always going to be moving because one guy was going to be driving, the other guy was going to be sleeping right behind him, and vice versa. And so my dad would drive all the way to El Paso, Texas from Fort Wayne, Indiana, not in a week, but in 2 or 3 days. Whew, I know. I get tired just thinking about that. Well, I'll say this, is you learn a lot about somebody when you're in those sorts of close quarters. And at times there were struggles. Now, I don't think my dad's ever really had a problem with getting along with other people, but this newfound faith that he had, well, it was causing some issues there in the truck. You see, my dad was a fairly moral guy before he came to know Christ, but certainly things really started taking off in his life as far as following Christ. And there were things that the other guys did maybe away from their families that wasn't something that my dad wanted to be a part of. There were ways to kind of cook the books back then to make more money, to drive longer, to go farther. And honestly, after time working through different teams, Dad found himself on the outside looking in. He didn't want to be dishonest. He didn't want to take advantage of the company or be in immoral places. And so it cost him. It cost him financially. You see, you made more money working as a team, but he didn't want to throw Jesus under the bus to make more. So he made less with a different schedule. As a matter of fact, he might have even been working more to make less, which is not the prevailing thought when it comes to working, right? But he chose to honor Christ before the almighty dollar. I have a friend who, in his 50s, very successful guy, and working for this internationally known company as a vice president, and he just felt God's prompting to sell it all and to move to Africa to work alongside an orphanage and church planting ministry. One problem. With the downturn in the economy, he was upside down with his house. It caused some delay. And then finally was just the decision, okay, if I lose money, I lose money, because I need to follow God's prompting in my life. Today they're happily now in Africa, and they're really making a difference for the kingdom, even seeing Muslims turn and follow the Lord Jesus Christ because of what they are doing in their witness. But it definitely cost him financially. Here's the next one. A next cost. How about reputation? How about our own reputations? Let me draw our attention back to David just for a moment. In 2 Samuel 6:21 through 22, it says this: David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people, Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes, but by these girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." You know, as a youth pastor, I'm sure some people might think, of course he would gravitate towards this one because middle school, especially high school students, really care about what other people think about them. But you know, as I think about it, I've always been a youth pastor my entire time in the church, but I've done other things along with being a youth pastor. So I also remember sometimes being the young adult pastor at that church. And here's what I've come to realize about that is, you know what young adults really care about? What other people think about them, you know? And, you know, as I'm thinking about that, you know, I've also been the minister of education, which that basically meant I was in charge of, you know, people from crib to grave. And I'm thinking about those adults that I led and served. And yeah, as I'm thinking about it, it seems like they all cared about what other people thought about them too. I'll be honest, as adults, though, a lot of times we kind of tell people that we've learned to say that we don't care what other people think. But honestly, actions speak louder than words, don't they? And if you start living for Jesus with everything that you've got, others will think differently about you. Some people will like it. Some people will like the changes that take place in your life. Some people won't understand those changes. But still others, listen, they're not going to like it at all about what's taking place in your life. King David here, he was overly excited about the Ark of the Covenant entering the city. He couldn't contain his excitement. I mean, all of a sudden, here's the presence of God in this form of this box being brought in, and he was just excited, and he's dancing, and he's jumping for joy. And to be honest with you, it looks like he really made a spectacle of himself, and his wife didn't think too highly of her husband, the king, acting in such a way. Certainly not in public. Guys, are you with me on this? Acting one way in the home, okay. Acting that same way out in public, not so much. Okay, I got you. So David here is being ridden by his wife here for just his excitement, but look what his response is. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified in this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. I think for the first time, I found a man who really didn't care what other people thought about him at the moment. I had a young adult one time who went off to seminary and was so vocal in sharing the gospel that even seminary professors were telling him to tone it down. And he didn't. And he went from seminary to Utah, taking that same boldness with him, sharing the gospel with die-hard Mormons. Good thing he doesn't really care what others think about him, because I'm sure he's not the most loved person where he lives. As a matter of fact, I'm sure there's actually people and Mormon churches who actually hate him. But the kingdom is better and larger as a result, even if it's at the expense of his likability where he is. You know, speaking about sharing our faith, the number one reason why we don't share our faith is what? It's fear. But what is that fear? Fear that they're not going to respond to Jesus? Fear that they're going to go away mad? No, the fear is they're going to what? They're not going to like me. That they're going to think less of me. And that fear keeps us from sharing so much, because it has to do with what? Our reputation, and a whole lot less of what we might think that they think about Jesus. Here's another one. Security. Security. Look with me in Matthew 8:20. It says this. Jesus is talking here. And he says, foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. You know what? Jesus had anything but a settled life. He did not have a home for his own. And he says there that the foxes and the birds, look, they have some sort of home. They have some sort of protection. They have some sort of security from the elements and other animals. But Jesus, he didn't have any of these things. He was dependent upon the Father to meet his needs daily, every day. Now, I know this. We take security very seriously in our society. As a country, we have armies and customs and Coast Guard and Border Patrol. And in our states, we have state patrol and sheriff deputies and police officers. And in our homes, we have locks and we have double locks and we have guns and we have alarm systems. We have safety procedures for this very worship service today. All right, we take our safety seriously in our society. But let me just say this, is following Christ, well, there will be a cost to this desire for this buttoned-up, secure lifestyle. For he will call you to step out of your secure home to go talk to your neighbor about him. He will ask you to go talk to that homeless guy that honestly you're not sure where he's coming from. He might even ask you to step on a plane and go to another country where security isn't so well secure. You know, I'll never forget a mentor that I had to me personally, and then honestly, a mentor. They were a mentor couple to Penny and I as we were dating, and then as we were newly married. And he said this: if God called his little girl to go to Africa, then Africa it will be, because that's the safest place in the will of God. I thought I knew what that meant right then. But honestly, over the years, I've come to understand what he was truly talking about. He wasn't talking about the fact that it's going to be completely safe. He just meant this. You know what? Safe didn't necessarily mean without danger. But would I rather be in danger from this world or in danger of being outside the will of God and not have him on my side? And yes, by the way, that little girl grew up and left the safety of Southwest Missouri and went to Africa. I guess you should watch what you say in conversations. Lastly, is our very life, as a matter of fact. In Luke 14, 27 and 33, it says this, whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. And then 33, in the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. I left this one last, but I'll be honest with you, it's first. It's overarching over everything else. There's no missing what Jesus means here when he references the cross. He wasn't talking about some kind of inconveniences that take place following him. No, when he said the cross, everyone knew what he was referencing because the cross means death. And when people carried their cross, they were carrying it for a purpose because they were carrying it on their way to be put on that cross. And no one comes back from that. It meant certain death. Our love for Jesus is to go beyond even our elemental desire for self-preservation. Not something that we say much about in our country, but we are to follow him and no one else, not even ourselves. We are to give up trying to do life, things by the beat of our own drum and only move to the beat of Jesus Christ. Tell me that's not a daily chore. Don't we naturally fight that day in and day out? Every day tempted to do what feels natural to us, what gives us the most satisfaction, instead of following Jesus' lead in everything. And of course, in verse 33, he says that you have to give up everything. He's saying, yes, your life belongs to me, but so does everything you have. Pastor tells this story. A man sees this pearl and says to the merchant, I want this pearl. How much is it? The seller says, it's very expensive. How much? A lot. Well, do you think I could buy it? The man says. Oh, yes, says the merchant. Everyone can buy it. But I thought you said it was very expensive. I did. Well, how much? Everything you have, says the seller. All right, I'll buy it. Okay, what do you have? Well, I have $10,000 in the bank. Good, 10,000. What else? That's all I have, nothing more. Well, I have a few dollars in my pocket. How much? Let's see, $100. That's mine too, says the seller. What else do you have? That's all, nothing else. Where do you live? The seller asks. In my house. Yes, I own a home. The seller writes down, house. It's mine. Where do you expect me to sleep? In my camper? Oh, you have a camper, do you? That too. What else? Am I supposed to sleep in my car? Oh, you have a car. Yes, I own 2 of them. They're mine now. Look, you've taken my money, my house, my camper, and my cars. Where is my family going to live? So you have a family. Yes, I have a wife and 3 kids. They're mine now. Suddenly, the seller exclaims, oh, I almost forgot. You yourself, too. Everything's mine. Wife, children, house, money, cars, and you too. Then he goes on, now listen, I will allow you to use all these things for the time being, but don't forget that they're all mine, just as you are. And whenever I need any of them, you must give them up, because I am now the owner. God is a demanding God. He's demanding of his disciples. He's demanding of his followers. But know this, following Jesus is going to cost you in this world. You, me, everyone needs to count the cost. It costs us everything. Your life is no longer your own. As such, it will cost you. When I count the cost, though, I realize real soon there is no price that I can put. There's no price I can put on my relationship with him. There's no price I can put on the salvation that I have found in and through him. Mark 8:36 says this, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? There's a lot more at stake than what we always want to think about. We get focused on the moment, whatever the present stress is. We let the focus of those things take us away from the bigger picture. But when we weigh the scales with the current cost of following Christ versus the salvation of our souls, it seems to me like a no-brainer that following Christ wins every time. Listen, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed this morning, my point is not to make you feel worse about yourself or about your relationship with God. It is a challenge to you. It is a challenge to me. It is a challenge to move closer to Christ. It is a challenge to continue in the fight and pay the price of following Christ as it presents itself. It might even be a challenge for some of us to wake up and realize that we haven't been paying any costs at all. But Jesus is worth the cost. And best yet, and this is no cop-out, he loves you and he is unwilling to let you go. So step up and do more than just anteing up, and let's go all in. I left some space between that last point and what the two statements I'll read right here at the end. But the deal is this, if you want to write this down, the value I place on Jesus is the cost I'm willing to pay. The value I place on Jesus is the cost I'm willing to pay. Let me give you these two action points. Do this. When sharing the gospel, let the person count the cost. You're not a shady salesman trying to close a deal. None of us can force somebody into the kingdom with some eloquent speech or trying to push them one way or the other. Let's actually tell them the full gospel and allow them to actually count the cost before they really make a decision for him. And for each of us, just to answer this next action point, what cost are you struggling to pay in your life today in following Christ? Maybe right there above, you might just circle one of those that you're struggling with. Or maybe even the Holy Spirit this morning has whispered in your ear and given you a different cost that you've been struggling with, and you might just write that out there in the margin. I just know this, is salvation is free, but following Christ isn't cheap. Bonhoeffer, somebody that Pastor Jerry has quoted in the past, says this, the only man who has the right to say that he is justified by grace alone is the man who has left all to follow Christ. I'll say it again. The value I place on Jesus is the cost I'm willing to pay. Let's stand. Father God, thank you so very much for who you are, and God, for the fact that you have paid the price for our sin. God, there's a price that we pay. There's a price that we pay in following you. God, may we choose to honor you because of the great price that you have paid, to offer up to you the costs in this life that we experience in following you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
What a beautiful name it is, the name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is, nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is, the name of Jesus. What a beautiful name it is, what a beautiful name it is, the name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is, nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is, the name of Jesus.
Maybe there's somebody here that honestly, you just know that, you know what, I've never paid that cost. And listen, as people are leaving, would you go against the grain come down here. There'll be some people who would pray with you. Maybe there's somebody here today really struggling with one of those costs right now. And maybe you'd just like to have some encouragement and allow somebody to just give you maybe some words of wisdom, or honestly, just to pray with you. And so as we close here this day, you make your way forward if you need to do that. And for each of you, this is the land of the free. And I do hope that you'll enjoy the 4th. And God bless you guys, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.